The reason there's such a gap is our schools teach us to work for this.
Yeah.
Go to school, get a job,
Right.
work hard, pay taxes,
Yeah.
save money, buy a house, and put your money in the stock market.
Right.
I don't touch any of that.
This was one of the very first investment books I ever read, and honestly, it changed the way I think about money forever. Before picking it up, I thought like most people do. You go to school, you get good grades, you land a job, you work hard, you save, and eventually you retire. That was the plan I thought I had to follow. But reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad flipped that whole idea upside down. It made me realize that money isn't just something you earn and spend. It's a tool you can control, and if you learn how to use it properly, it can buy you freedom. The book is written around the lessons Robert Kiyosaki learned from two father figures in his life. His real dad, who he calls his poor dad, and the dad of his best friend, who he calls his rich dad. His poor dad was educated, had a good job, and believed in working hard for security. His rich dad, on the other hand, didn't even finish school, but he understood money in a way most people never do. The contrast between their teachings is where all the lessons come from, and those lessons completely shifted how I now look at wealth. The first big thing that hit me was this: the rich don't work for money. That sounded strange at first, but once I thought about it, it made sense. Poor Dad's mindset was that you should study hard, get a good job, and then depend on your paycheck for the rest of your life. But Rich Dad said no, you make money work for you. That means instead of trading time for money, you invest in things that create income even when you're not working. And here's how Robert Kiyosaki himself explains it.
So as long as, that's why in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, lesson number one was the rich don't work for money. Because the moment you work for money, you're taxed. And so this tax reform is a good idea. But for a young guy like you, it's best to learn early.
That blew my mind because I realized most people spend their whole lives trapped, working harder and harder, but never actually getting ahead. It made me think, am I just chasing a bigger paycheck? Or am I building something that can free me? Another huge lesson was about assets and liabilities. Honestly, before this book, I didn't even know the difference clearly. Most people don't. We grow up thinking our house is an asset or that a new car is something valuable. But Rich Dad explained it in the simplest way possible. An asset puts money into your pocket, and a liability takes money out. That's it. So if you buy a rental property that brings you monthly rent, that's an asset. If you buy a fancy car that keeps draining you with loan payments and maintenance, that's a liability. Once I understood that, I started looking at everything differently. I started asking myself, is this purchase going to make me richer, or is it secretly making me poorer? And let me tell you, that shift in thinking alone can change your entire financial future. But it's not just about money and things, it's about mindset. That's probably the most important lesson I took away. Rich Dad always pushed the idea that your mind is your greatest asset. If you think poor, you'll stay poor. If you train your mind to see opportunities, to learn about money, to not be afraid of risks, you can open doors that most people don't even know exist. Poor Dad thought security was the goal. Get a safe job, steady income, and don't rock the boat. Rich Dad thought freedom was the goal. Control your time, control your money, and let your money create more money. That shift from security to freedom was something I had never even considered until reading this book. One of the lessons that really stuck with me was about entrepreneurship. Rich Dad always encouraged building businesses instead of just working in one. He believed in creating systems that made money, whether you were there or not. At first, that felt intimidating. Like, who am I to start a business? But then I realized it's not about building the next Apple or Tesla overnight. It's about starting something small, learning how money flows through it, and growing from there. That could be anything. a side hustle, an online project, even investing in other businesses. The point is, entrepreneurship gives you leverage, and leverage is how wealth multiplies. And tied to that is the idea that job security isn't really security at all. Poor Dad always talked about climbing the ladder, working your way up, getting promotions, and earning a stable paycheck. But Rich Dad pointed out something that hit me hard. Even the most secure jobs can vanish. Companies close, industries change, and no one is truly safe if all they rely on is one paycheck. Real security doesn't come from a job. It comes from building income streams that don't depend on a boss or a single source. That idea made me start thinking beyond just earning money. And instead, I started focusing on how I could create money. Another major takeaway for me was how important financial literacy really is. Schools teach us math, history, science, but almost nothing about money. We learn how to be employees, not how to be financially free. To make it even clearer, listen to what Robert Kiyosaki says.
So I remember raising my hand when I was 9 years old, talking to my fourth grade teacher, and I said, when am I going to learn about money? And she was this woman who should have retired 50 years earlier. She was so sick and tired of kids by this time. She says, the love of money is the root of all evil. And I said, what am I, in Sunday school? And I was this punky little 9-year-old kid. And she says, we don't teach money at school. I said, why not? And she couldn't answer me. And she got very flustered. She said, sit down, take your seat. And then I got curious. I said, why don't we learn about money? She says, go ask your father. He's my boss. So my father was the head of education, PhD, all that stuff. I go home and ask him, I said, why don't we learn about money in school? And he looked at me and says, because the government doesn't let us teach that subject. The government tells us what we can teach and what we can't teach. And I thought that was strange. And I said, but aren't we going to school to learn about money? He says, no, your job is to get a job. I said, but you get a job to earn money. He goes, no, you're supposed to just get a job. And I went, no. Isn't the purpose of a job to earn money? He goes, you're correct. I said, so why don't I just learn about money? I can skip the job part,
Rich Dad explained that understanding financial statements, balance sheets, and cash flow isn't just for accountants. It's the language of money. If you don't know how to read it, you're basically financially blind. When I first thought about it, I realized how true it was. Most people work their whole lives, but never actually learn how money works. They know how to earn it and spend it, but not how to grow it or protect it. That's why so many people stay stuck paycheck to paycheck, even if they're earning a good income. Once you learn how to manage and grow money, you're already ahead of 90% of the world. Another thing that stood out was Rich Dad's belief that you should work to learn, not just to earn. That lesson changed the way I look at jobs and opportunities. Poor Dad believed in working for a paycheck. Rich Dad believed in working for skills. He said it's better to take a job where you learn valuable skills, like sales, leadership, communication, or investing. Even if the pay isn't amazing, because those skills will pay you forever. That made me reflect on my own life. Sometimes we get caught up in chasing money right now, but the real wealth is in the abilities we develop. Skills are assets, and once you have them, no one can take them away from you. One of the most eye-opening lessons for me was about taxes and corporations. Now, I know that sounds boring at first, but the way Rich Dad broke it down made me see things differently. He explained how the rich legally use corporations and the tax system to their advantage. Poor Dad, like most employees, would earn money, get taxed, and then spend whatever was left. Rich Dad, on the other hand, would earn money through a corporation, spend on business expenses, and then pay taxes on what was left after that. It flipped the whole order. That's why so many wealthy people are able to keep more of what they earn. It wasn't about cheating the system, it was about understanding the rules of the system. That lesson made me realize how powerful financial education really is. If you don't know the rules, you'll always be at a disadvantage. Then there was the lesson that the rich invent money. At first, I thought that sounded crazy, but it's really about how they see opportunities where others see problems. Rich Dad explained that money isn't just sitting out there waiting, it's created by ideas, by deals, by spotting what others miss. Poor Dad would see risks and stay away. Rich Dad would see chances and figure out how to make them work. It's that mindset of abundance versus scarcity. Poor Dad thought the pie was fixed, that you had to fight for a piece of it. Rich Dad thought you could always make the pie bigger. That made me start looking at life differently. Instead of saying, I can't afford this, or I'll never be able to do that, I started asking, how can I afford this? How can I make it happen? And that tiny shift in language changes your brain. It pushes you to be creative, to think bigger, to find solutions instead of excuses. One of the most powerful lessons, maybe the one that sticks with me the most, is that action beats fear. Fear is what keeps people stuck. Fear of losing money, fear of looking stupid, fear of failing. Poor Dad let fear control him, so he played it safe. Rich Dad said the difference between the rich and the poor isn't that the rich don't feel fear, it's that they act anyway. They fail, they learn, and they try again. That's the real secret. Reading a book is great. Learning these lessons is powerful, but if you never apply them, nothing changes. Rich Dad believed that every mistake is a lesson, and every lesson makes you stronger. That made me realize that the real risk isn't trying and failing. The real risk is never trying at all. When I finished the book, I didn't just feel like I had read about money, I felt like I had read about life. It was about more than just getting rich. It was about freedom, mindset, and courage. It was about questioning the things we're taught and daring to think differently. For me, Rich Dad, Poor Dad wasn't just an investment book. It was a wake-up call. It made me realize that the life I wanted, one where I wasn't chained to a paycheck, where I had time freedom, and where I could take care of the people I love, was actually possible if I applied these lessons. Looking back, I think what really made this book special for me was that it didn't just give financial advice. It gave me a new lens to see the world through. Before, I thought wealth was only for a certain type of person, people born into the right family, or people who got lucky. But Rich Dad, Poor Dad showed me that wealth is built by mindset, habits, and choices. It showed me that anyone willing to learn and take action can create it. And that was so freeing to realize. The contrast between the two dads in the book is what sticks with you. Poor Dad's advice wasn't bad. It was safe, traditional, and it's what most of us are raised with. Get good grades, find a steady job, save for retirement. But it was Rich Dad's advice that opened my eyes. Work to learn, build assets, take risks, and let money work for you. One mindset leads to comfort and security, but also limitation. The other leads to freedom, growth, and endless possibility. After reading it, I started noticing how often people around me repeated Poor Dad's thinking without even realizing it. People saying things like, I can't afford that, or that's too risky, or I just need a good stable job. And then I started hearing Rich Dad's voice in my head, saying, don't say I can't afford it, ask how you can afford it. Don't avoid risk, learn to manage it. Don't depend on one paycheck, build streams of income. It was like I couldn't unsee it anymore. And that's when I realized this book had already changed me. The biggest lesson for me personally, the one that keeps driving me today, is that fear and comfort are the enemies of growth. Fear keeps people from trying, and comfort keeps people stuck where they are. But once you step past fear and move out of comfort, that's where freedom starts. And that's exactly what Rich Dad was trying to teach. So when I look at my own journey now, I can honestly say this book was the spark. It didn't make me rich overnight. It didn't hand me a blueprint to millions, but it planted the seed. It taught me to think like an investor, to see money as a tool, and to stop limiting myself with old beliefs. And if it could do that for me, I believe it can do it for anyone who picks it up with an open mind. If you've made it this far in the video, here's what I want you to take away. It's not about how much money you make right now. It's about how you think, how you learn, and what you do with what you have. Start small, build assets, keep learning, and don't be afraid to take action. Every great journey begins with one step, and for me, reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad was that first step. So if you're serious about building a different kind of life, a life where money works for you instead of the other way around, then don't just listen to these lessons. Live them. Apply them in your daily decisions, even in small ways. Because once you shift your mindset, everything else starts to follow. And before we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. The rich don't work for money. They make money work for them. Remember that the next time you're faced with a decision about how to spend your time or your paycheck, ask yourself, am I working for money right now, or am I making money work for me? That single question can change your future. Thanks so much for watching. And if this resonated with you, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to grab a copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad for yourself, I've left a link down in the description. Trust me, it's worth every page. Thank you again for being here. So stick around because there's so much more to come. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep building the life you deserve.